Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we talk about the ongoing India China crisis and the options that are now left with India. We will also take a quick look at Kerala's new COVID 19 rules. But first, we talk about the Indian Council for Medical Research, or ICMR, which is the country's nodal body to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. As cases and deaths due to COVID 19 continue to rise, the world remains hopeful for a vaccine, which perhaps will be our ultimate weapon against the virus. Now, even as trials for various vaccine candidates continue, a letter from ICMR surfaced last week in which it promised to deliver a vaccine by the 15th of August, India's Independence Day, which is now 40 days away. The letter came as a shock to the medical community at large, was severely criticized by scientists, and raised questions about ICMR's credibility. In the first segment, we talked to Amitabh Sinha, who reports on matters of science and environment for the Indian Express, about this letter and the deadline it sets. And he first talks about the vaccine that ICMR wants to deliver by August 15.
So there is this candidate vaccine. It's called a candidate vaccine till it becomes a full-fledged vaccine. So there's a candidate vaccine that has been developed within India for coronavirus. Now, there are several such candidate vaccines being developed across the world. One of them is being developed in India by Bharat Biotech in partnership with Pune-based National Institute of Virology, which is an ICMR laboratory.
Bharat Biotech is the Indian company that has previously created vaccines for the rotavirus and H1N1. Their vaccine candidate for this novel coronavirus is called Covaxin.
Now, this particular vaccine, on 29th of June, it got the approval to conduct human trials, basically clinical trials, and it got permission to conduct phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials for the vaccine. Now, there are three phases: phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials that need to be carried out. Right now, it has got approvals for phase 1 and phase 2.
The approvals for phase 3 have not happened yet because those are only granted after you complete phase 2. What had happened was that after getting approvals for phase 1 and 2, 12 hospitals were selected where these clinical trials would happen.
And what happened is on 2nd of July, that is just 3 days ago, the Director General of ICMR wrote a letter to all these 12 hospitals telling them that it was envisaged to launch this vaccine by 15th of August. And therefore, please fast track all the approvals related to initiation of the clinical trials. And then there is a warning saying non-compliance would be viewed seriously.
And this is the letter and the words it uses that has triggered huge criticism from the scientific community.
Everyone points out that there are very serious problems with this letter, apart from the fact that the tone itself is very threatening and you don't write letters like this. But that apart, the more substantive part relates to the timeline that is mentioned, 15th of August. Now, we need to remember a few things. The clinical trials are yet to begin. Normally, such kind of clinical trials takes months, if not years.
The phase 1 trial, Amitabh says, is about testing whether or not the vaccine candidate is safe to inject in the human body, whether or not there are any side effects. For example, whether or not one gets rashes due to it, or fever, or any other serious complications.
So it's usually carried out on a few dozen volunteers, and these volunteers have to be enrolled. There is a proper procedure for enrolling these volunteers in the trial. Their consent is taken, and that itself is a long process. And this phase 1 trial would continue for about 2 months, if not more. Then you get into the phase 2 trials. Phase 2 trials are about checking what is called immunogenicity of the vaccine. In simpler terms, what it means is the vaccine, whether it triggers the desired immune response in your body or not.
The idea is to test whether or not the vaccine candidate actually works. Amitabh says that in this phase, hundreds of volunteers are enrolled and given the shot of the vaccine candidate. And then they are tracked to see whether the desired immune response has been triggered or not.
Now, again, it takes several months to do this. But in the best case scenario, still it would take at least a couple of months to do this. Even if you are like in a lot of haste and you are like fast tracking everything, it would still take about 2 to 3 months to complete this. Now, we haven't begun the phase one trials. Phase two trials also have to be done. There's just a little more than a month between now and 15th of August. Phase three trials, even the approvals have not been sought.
And phase 3 is the stage where you give the vaccine to thousands of volunteers. That's when you are testing whether the immune response that was triggered in phase 2 can actually fight the virus. This requires letting those thousands of people work in normal circumstances and seeing whether they get infected or not. And this again requires time. And having just received approval for phase 1 and 2, Bharat Biotech is nowhere near that. Definitely nowhere near August 15.
So, this timeline is completely ridiculous and it's impossible. I mean, until unless you decide to do away with phase three trials that you don't do at all and somehow rush through phase one and phase two, that is the only way where this 15th of August deadline can be met. But that would not be a proper process at all. That would just be like launching anything. And that's why, if you have to follow the process of vaccine development, then 15th of August is not just an unreasonable timeline, it is an impossible timeline. And that's what all the scientists have been saying, that this kind of pressure, it's not just unethical, but it's also completely unsafe.
To give context, the fastest vaccine to have been developed was the vaccine for mumps, and that took 4 years.
In fact, before this letter came out, the company itself had circulated a background note on the vaccine that it had developed. And in that background note, it had mentioned that it expected the phase one and phase two trials to be completed by October this year, after which they will go and seek permission for the wider clinical trials, meaning phase three, in which several thousand people have to be enrolled. Right? So this is the company itself saying, just a couple of days before this letter comes there, company itself says that it would take at least October to do the phase one and phase two trials, after which they would go into phase three. So everyone who knows the process of how a vaccine is developed is totally flummoxed by this 15th of August timeline.
The other important thing that Amitabh points out is the problem in having a set deadline in the first place.
Supposing this deadline that was mentioned was not 15th of August 2020, but say 15th of August 2021 or 15th of August 2022, it would still have been problematic, because even in that case, we are presupposing the outcome of a scientific experiment. And you just cannot do that. You are assuming that the experiment that you're carrying out would actually lead to a presupposed or a predetermined result. And that is not how it happens. So if you look at the other statements that are being made globally about other vaccine candidates that are being tried out, people are saying, no, we expect this to take at least 18 to 20 months or at least 2 years. So they are hedging. Nobody is giving you a definitive date by which they are going to launch a vaccine. So that is the sort of problems that this kind of statement makes, wherein you are already presupposing the outcome itself.
An important point to note is that it is very much possible that we won't have a vaccine against this virus. Just like we still don't have a vaccine against the HIV virus that scientists have been trying to develop for years. And the other thing to consider about this letter are the 12 hospitals it was sent to. The 12 hospitals that have been chosen for clinical trials. Many have now raised concerns about whether all these hospitals are even equipped to conduct these trials.
As all the scientists also point out, the clinical trials are very, very sensitive. You are trying to inject a foreign chemical into a human body for the first time, and then you have to see the kind of response that it triggers in human bodies. So you have to have a very well equipped and experienced people in hospital to deal with clinical trials. Usually, for such trials, only very well equipped hospitals with prior experience in carrying out clinical trials are enrolled. They are selected for as sites for these trials.
Among these hospitals, there are a few big and reputed ones, like AIIMS in New Delhi and its branch in Patna.
But nearly half of the 12 are private sector hospitals, which are not that well known. There is one in Rohtak, there is one in Kanpur, there is one in Gorakhpur, another one in Nagpur, then one in Belgaum, and one in Odisha, the other one in Goa. These are the hospitals that are not very well known. Their credentials are not very known within the scientific community. So there is suspicion whether these hospitals and the lead investigators there are equipped to handle a sensitive situation like this. And supposing if something goes wrong or an untoward sort of a reaction happens because of that vaccine, then you need that hospital to be equipped with those kind of measures which can immediately deal with that situation. So there are question marks, at least amongst the scientific community, whether the hospitals that have been chosen, whether they have that kind of credentials, that kind of experience to be able to handle this kind of sensitive clinical trials or not. And at least a couple of hospitals that I think we have tried, at least one of them did probably mention that they had no prior experience in carrying out clinical trials. Probably this was the first time that they were doing it.
After widespread criticism and much controversy, ICMR came out with another statement on Saturday. But even this statement did not deny 15th of August as the date they were looking at for the vaccine. It said that the timeline was mentioned to, quote, cut unnecessary red tape and fast track the development of the vaccine, unquote. But the earlier letter had made no mention of that.
I mean, from that letter, actually, that's not evident that it was just meant to cut red tape. There's a very specific phrase that was used, and it said it is envisaged to launch the vaccine by 15th of August. Now, this is not to cut red tape. So, of course, with the clarification that has come on Saturday, it's not very clear, and actually it doesn't show ICMR in very good light again. Actually, it's very, very intriguing why this has happened, because the ICMR DG himself is a very well regarded, well respected professional, a very well respected health expert. He obviously knows the entire process. And I'm sure, and all the scientists also say this, that he certainly knows that this is not possible. So therefore, they are all the more intrigued as to why such a letter has been issued, despite everyone knowing that this is an impossible timeline, this is not going to be achieved. Why would such a letter be issued?
There are now speculations that this letter is an indication that ICMR is not immune to the political and social pressures around the rush to create a vaccine. And the incident has raised questions and concern about the credibility of ICMR.
So actually, a lot of scientists I spoke to, they were very concerned about that aspect as well. The fact that India would be laughed at because of such a step. And quite a few of them pointed out that globally, India is a serious player in science. It's seen as a very responsible player and a very serious player, not just in drug discovery, but in general, the way we do science. And our scientists and scientific community is very well respected. Now, that is what they fear would get eroded if we behave in a manner like this. Now, supposing this vaccine actually does succeed very well and we take it to the market and we give it to the world, but then there would be trust issues associated with it because of how we have proceeded with it in the past. And that would be very, very detrimental to how India and Indian science is viewed globally.
Before we get to the next segment, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. In this segment, we talk about the ongoing India-China crisis along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh. It has now been more than 2 months since the tension between the two countries began. As we have discussed previously, the Chinese troops have changed the status quo in the region and have transgressed along at least 4 points on the LAC: the Galwan Valley, the Hot Spring area, Pegongso, and Depsang. In this segment, we talk to Sushant Singh, Indian Express's deputy editor, about the ongoing standoff and the options that India can now look at. He first talks about the situation on the ground.
So the situation on the ground remains unchanged. It is very tense. Tensions are high on both sides, and there has been no disengagement or de-escalation in any significant manner, so to speak, so far. So essentially, we are 9 weeks into the tensions, and the situation remains as bad as it was earlier, up from north down to south.
During this time, there have been 3 rounds of talks between the core commanders, but they have not yielded the results that many were hoping for.
The first round on 5th of June, actually, people thought that there was some progress and there was a lot of discussion that, there could be a disengagement. But after the incident on June 15, when 20 Indian soldiers and an unspecified number of Chinese soldiers died in that clash at Galwan, since then, there has been no progress whatsoever. 2 rounds of talks have taken place since then on 22nd of June and 30th of June between the core commanders. But clearly, the impasse has not been broken. The deadlock has not been broken. And the army seems to be preparing itself for a long haul to stay at the LAC, to remain deployed, and to prevent any further eventualities or any further ingress by the Chinese.
Among the 4 friction points, Pegongso, Sushant says, continues to be a big sore point, where the Chinese are simply refusing to go back or restore the status quo.
As you know, they have come and made large number of constructions, which satellite imagery has shown, and these are serious constructions. These are concrete structures or brick structures or semi-permanent structures. They put up a China map there in color, which can be picked up by satellite. They put up Chinese characters there, which are seen in satellite imagery. And they've been pushing on the Indian deployment. They've been leaning on the Indian deployment, so to speak, even to the best of finger 4. And as per my understanding, what we are picking up from officials is that there is no conversation happening on Pegongso. The Chinese are just not talking about Pegongso. So they have actually altered the status quo at Pegongso, come further to the west, at least 8 kilometers further to the west, and they are just not talking to Indians about it. It's almost that they have altered the status quo and that they want this new status quo to be accepted as it is.
Depsang, on the other hand, remains a lower priority for India right now because there is a belief that it was always a disputed area and that even though Chinese have come in, they may also go back.
But the focus remains on Galwan and Hot Springs, the PP14, PP15, and PP17A or 17 Alpha. These are the 3 locations where initial progress, it is believed, could be made in some amount of disengagement or de-escalation. And the reason for this is very simple. Both Pegongso and Depsang have had disputed LACs or LACs where both sides do not agree on where the LAC passes. Both sides have different versions of the LAC. In Galwan and in Hot Springs, the LAC has been more or less settled since 1962 to the areas to which the Indian side has patrolled and the area to which Chinese soldiers have patrolled has been more or less stable. So the expectation is that, because historically that has been a settled area, the 2 sides can arrive at a solution, at a resolution. At Pegongso, the Chinese can always say, we have always believed that this is where we are and we have always patrolled up to this area, so we are just coming into our area. Same is true for Depsang. So the expectation and hopes are pinned more on Galwan Valley and in Hot Spring. That is PP14, PP15, and PP17 Alpha.
Last week, one story that made news was the government clearing the purchase of new fighter aircrafts, which included 21 MiG-29s and 12 Sukhoi missiles and ammunition, which would be part of a 38,900 crore package to boost the combat capabilities of the armed forces. This gave some the impression that the army is preparing itself if things were to escalate. Though Sushant says that while this had good signaling value for Indian citizens, this would not make much of a difference at the border.
Each of these projects which have been sanctioned will take at least a few months, if not more, to get inducted. and to then be operationally ready. In any case, most of these proposals were already on the table. The proposal for these additional aircraft to the MiG-29s and the Sukhois to replace the crashed Sukhois was already on the table for more than a year. It may have been accelerated or it may have been given a sanction now because of the current tensions, but it is not that it's something new which has come up and it will directly impact the situation on the ground. These are not game changer equipment being bought to alter the situation on the ground. But nevertheless, they do send a signal to Indians that the government is serious, government is looking at the defense, and government is trying to buy certain equipment. So a lot of times, a lot of actions that the government of India does, or a lot of words that the government of India uses, are actually meant for domestic consumption than for any material change in the military balance on the ground.
And as far as signaling goes, the other big news related to the crisis has been Prime Minister Modi's unannounced visit to Ladakh on Friday. This was the first visit from the executive leadership to the area since the standoff started. Among other things, Modi spoke with the soldiers that were injured during the violent face-off last month and gave a speech in which he said that the era of expansionism is over and that history is witness that such forces have been wiped out or have been forced to turn around.
विस्तारवाद का युग समाप्त हो चुका है और साथियों ये न भूले इतिहास गवाह है कि ऐसी ताकतें मिट गई हैं या मुड़ने के लिए मजबूर हो गई है.
In his speech, he didn't mention China anywhere, but it was clearly a signal to the country. And China did not miss the signal and responded by saying that it is groundless to view China as expansionist. In some places, Modi's address was seen as sending a strong message to China and also his words giving a morale boost to the troops. So we asked Sushant what was the significance of the Prime Minister's visit to Ladakh.
There are a couple of significant points. One is very clearly it's a signal to Indians, to the domestic constituency to lift their morale. And also it is an acknowledgement of the fact that the situation on the border is so serious that it warrants a visit by the Prime Minister himself. So far the government has been very coy about the whole thing. The Prime Minister's controversial statement in the all-party committee and the long clarification after that. The kind of statements which are tiptoeing around the truth by the foreign ministry, army's reticence to issue a formal statement on anything that has happened, whether it was the 10 soldiers taken captive or 20 dead, the time taken in releasing those decisions, or the outcomes of the core commanders meeting. The communication from the government of India has been very scattered. It has not been very clear and firm so far. This visit by the Prime Minister makes it very clear that the situation on the border is very serious. It warrants a visit by the Prime Minister. And that by itself is a huge signal to the people of the country that the Prime Minister is cognizant of it. Their morale should be high, but the situation warrants the attention at the highest level and the utmost level of priority. That is the most significant message within the country.
The second significant message of the Prime Minister's visit, Sushant says, is to the Chinese.
You should just imagine if the Chinese premier or the Chinese president Xi Jinping was to come down to 100 kilometers behind Bengongso, was it at the Nagari prefecture or somewhere, and he were to address his soldiers or something, how would we be responding? It's a clear signal of intent, almost throwing the gauntlet, that we are not going to go back and we are going to be here and we are going to take you head on. It's a huge signal. It could also mean a certain degree of escalation vis-a-vis the Chinese, that, the situation could escalate a bit because the Chinese could be provoked by this. But I think that is a risk that the Prime Minister has taken by going there.
Though when it comes to the point about Modi's visit boosting the morale of the soldiers, he says that we should take that with a pinch of salt.
But yes, to the domestic Indian constituency, to the larger Indian public, lifting their morale, as well as signaling that the situation is very serious, that the Prime Minister is committed to that situation, and the message to China that India is going to take it on and not buckle under the pressure the Chinese are putting on them. I think those are the significant messages which come out of the Prime Minister's visit to Ladakh.
As Sushant mentioned earlier, it seems we are going to be in a long haul with China. But in a scenario where Chinese have consolidated their positions in some areas and are refusing to negotiate about others, what options does India have left?
of course, the options are very simple. Option says India can physically go and throw the Chinese out from the areas that they have come into and destroy everything that they have made in the last 2 months in those areas. But that would mean a full-blown war. We saw when Indians tried to remove those tents on June 15, it led to loss of lives on both sides. So clearly, it's a no-go. The second situation that the Indians can go and do is they can go into some other area and capture some territory and then go on the negotiating table and barter between the two territories. This was done in 2013 when the Chinese had come into Tepsang. Ashley Tellis is on record saying that Indians went into Chumar, went in a few kilometers, started constructing something. And the two sides then went on the negotiating table. Indians said, okay, if you walk back from Tepsang, go away from Tepsang, return from Tepsang, we will go and return from Chumar. So that can be done. That is the quid pro quo option. But for the quid pro quo option, the window of opportunity is always limited. And I think 8-9 weeks into the tension, that window of opportunity may already have been lost. Also, any move to capture Chinese territory now may be misread as a larger move by China of an Indian aggression or for an Indian assault or an Indian attack, and also may act as a needless provocation to further escalate into war. So that is the risk which is involved there.
The third option, Sushant says, could be fighting a limited war in a limited geography for a certain period of time to try and redress the balance.
But then, while we may want to fight a limited war, the enemy also has a vote. And the Chinese could actually decide to escalate the war all through the border, including Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh. Now, that would be something which would really strain the Indian forces, and the war may not remain limited. And the simple reason for that is that the Chinese have a integrated theater command structure where the whole India border comes under the Western Theater Command. So for them, it is one sector. We like to think of Ladakh as separate, Arunachal as separate, and the Himachal and Uttarakhand as separate. But for the Chinese, it is one theater. So it may not remain limited. That is, again, a huge risk of going into a full-blown war.
But the option that remains probable, and what is happening right now, is holding the line by deploying troops and negotiating with the other side.
So you hold that line where you are already there, so the Chinese do not come in any further where they are there. And then you start talking and negotiating. And through diplomatic maneuvers, through trade movements, through banning TikTok and other digital apps, by creating some kind of coalitions, alliances, friendly partnerships with countries in trade and security, the Quad and other things, you could somehow create an environment where the Chinese come under pressure and don't consider it worthwhile to stay and go back. But there are risks involved in that. The biggest risk is that the Chinese may say that this is the new status quo, you accept it and that all that is fine. Or this may actually end up reinforcing the new status quo, the new constructions, the new deployments, they may get reinforced. And the second challenge is that the Indian forces will have to survive and stay there through the winters, which, as you know, will place a huge logistics burden on the Indian forces, whether it is rations, whether it is habitat, whether it is supplies, medical supplies, communication. It would put a huge burden on the Indian forces. And so these are the considerations which the Indian side will have to work on and then decide. My estimate, based on what is currently happening over the last 9 weeks and what we are hearing from the people, is that India does not have an appetite to take the risk of going into a full-blown war unless it is thrust upon it. It would want to hold the line and then talk. And this is what it has been doing, so that the Chinese cannot ingress any further and the two sides can eventually talk and find some answers so that the status quo is restored.
And in the end, we talk about Kerala. Yesterday, the Kerala Health Department issued a notification extending the enforcement of the state's COVID-19 safety guidelines till July 2021 after amending the state epidemic disease ordinance. Wearing masks or face covers in public and social distancing are among the rules that will be mandatory. An amount of 10,000 rupees will be fined for not wearing masks in public places. Weddings can only be attended by up to 50 people and funerals by 20. No social gatherings, get-togethers, processions, dharnas, congregations or demonstrations can be conducted without written permission from authorities. The government also said that the participants in such gatherings will not exceed 10 people. In shops and all commercial establishments, the maximum number of people or customers allowed at a time shall not exceed 20. Aside from this, state capital Thiruvananthapuram will be placed under a week-long complete lockdown in the wake of a surge in COVID-19 cases in the state. All government offices, including state secretariat, will remain closed. The total lockdown will be in place from 6 a.m. today. Only hospitals and medical shops will remain open. Earlier, Tourism Minister Kadakampalli Surendran said that Thiruvananthapuram district is sitting on an active volcano with a rising number of COVID-19 cases, and there was no guarantee that there would be no community spread. Also yesterday, India surpassed Russia to become the third worst hit nation, with the number of COVID-19 standing at 6,90,396 according to COVID19India.org. India is now preceded only by Brazil and the US. You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.